Shepnaz podcast begins now.
Hey everyone, it's the Shepnaz podcast. Here at Shepherd Church, everything we do is to connect our community in a meaningful relationship with Christ, and I'm Joey. I get to be able to host this podcast, and I serve as a pastor here at Shepherd, and today we have a special guest, Steve Grove. He is here to talk about his story and how God's proven faithful in his life, and it all starts right now. Steve, thanks for being here, man. How you doing today?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Hey, as we get started, there's probably a lot of people who are listening to this who do know you and they love you and they're excited to hear about your story, but there are probably some others who aren't quite sure who you are. And so would you give us a little bit of background on you and your family?
Sure, absolutely. So my wife, Jennifer, and I have been attending Shepherd for about 19 years now. We actually came as a result of Shepherd Christian School.
Okay. So
it's been a blessing for us to be here. We have 3 daughters and 6 grandkids. That a few of them come here occasionally.
Yeah.
And we're thankful for this church. It's been a blessing to us.
Cool. And so you've been attending for 19 years here, but I'd love to hear maybe a quick story about your journey with Christ and kind of how you came to faith.
Well, absolutely. So I was raised in a Christian home. I'm thankful for that. Mm-hmm. So I was saved at a very young age after church in my bedroom with my parents, and grew up listening to Sunday school teachers and learning about the walk of the Lord in my life and how important it was to serve Him and to follow after His guidance.
Yeah, what a cool testimony. I mean, I think a lot of parents might hope that their kid would come to faith as a result of involvement in church, but how much better and just more fulfilling as a parent that it would happen in the house, in the home, and that's really cool. What a cool story. You've been here for 19 years, so I'm sure that there's some things that you've been a part of at Shepherd. And what are some things that you and your family are a part of here and get to serve at or get to participate in?
Sure. Yeah, we've been involved in many different ministries. Currently, I'm involved with the Welcome Team and the Coffee Ministry. Okay. I serve on the church board, on the Missions Council, and I have in the past sung in the choir and worked in that area. Been involved with the school ministry here for years, and I always feel it's everyone's role to help welcome people. Yeah. So I try to be a person in the lobby just to be, cool. How you doing? How are you? People I don't know, and I'm not typically afraid to talk to people.
Yeah, cool. Well, we have at Shepherd been in the midst of a new series. I guess maybe by this time it's not new, but we've been talking about money matters and biblical stewardship and what it means for our life. And we've invited Steve to come on the podcast to kind of help walk us through some of his story and how generosity and stewardship has kind of helped him in his walk. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have Steven talk about his story and maybe some of the things that he gleans from the Bible about stewardship and generosity. So stick around. One of the resources we want to let you in on as we are going through our sermon series, Money Matters, is a book by Randy Alcorn called The Treasured Principle, Unlocking the Secret of Joyful Giving. In the book, you'll hear the radical teaching of Jesus all about generosity. You can grab a copy in the lobby on Sundays, or you can find it for yourself on Amazon. Hopefully, once you discover this secret, your life will never look the same. Each month, our church gathers for an intentional time of prayer. Ignite happens on the first Tuesday of every month. We begin with expectant worship and then move into a time of prayer led by Pastor Rob. February 7th is the next Ignite from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Plus, we've got programming for your kids. We'll see you here at Shepherd on February 7th for Ignite. All right. Well, welcome back, Steve. When we kind of invited you to come on and we were so thankful for you accepting, we know that you have a story to tell when it comes to generosity and stewardship. But I'd love for you to help us understand kind of where your understanding of that stewardship, that kind of spiritual discipline comes from when we read the Bible.
Sure, absolutely. I think that as I've been a Christian in my life, especially adult life, realizing that as Pastor Rob has been preaching in this message series, that all things that we have are really belong to God. We're just the holder of those things for a period of time. But everything we have that in our life, both physical possessions as well as our spiritual life, really is dependent on God completely.
Yeah.
So that is a good way to look at it. And I think that what I've learned in my life is that by being generous and giving as God asks us to, and above that, that it enables us to trust Him more. Really what I've seen is that giving is evidence of the trust we have in God, regardless of the circumstances in our life, that we should trust. I think that one of my favorite passages that kind of relates to that is in the Old Testament when Solomon, I think Pastor Rob talked about him in one of the podcasts already, about being if not the wealthiest, one of the wealthiest people that's ever lived, and also one of the wisest people because of the way that God blessed him. That as the temple was being built, that the comment that was shared by his father David in 1 Chronicles 29, the end of that, right before David passed away, was that, "But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand." And that, to me, is such a powerful verse.
Yeah.
Because we realize that, who are we that we can give back to God? It's a blessing. And some may not see that, and I'm not anything special by any means at all, but that God shows me in my life that, I am called to be gracious and generous and to give back what really belongs to God anyway. And that statement that just really has always touched me, that we should be able to give as generously as this, that we're never going to be able to outgive what God can do for us. We never can. That the kind of the pairing of that scripture, goes to 1 Kings chapter 8. There's another prayer here where Solomon is praying, and he shares that in the last in verse 61 of that prayer, "But your hearts must be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by His decrees and obey His commands as at this time." That phrase, "fully committed," to me really speaks to how we live our life as Christians, that we rely on God for everything. And to me, giving teaches me that, because I have to realize that, Lord, on a human perspective, it may not make sense that I'm going to give this much to the work of God here at Shepherd Church. But when I read this type of passage and realize that full commitment is what causes me to trust that God will use that. Just before this podcast, there were a couple teens sitting in this chair, and
Well, they had two chairs. They weren't
two chairs.
Yeah.
Yes, they weren't sitting together. But as I saw them, I thought, what a blessing. Because for those two at least, and there are many that attend here that may not have grown up here, but those two did, and they were coming here as a very young age. And I think that those that have been faithful to give to this church for all these years, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80 years, and you see that children come to know the Lord and they're serving Him, it's a direct blessing to the people that have been giving, that God's using that to reach our community, to reach our families, that now they're independently wanting to serve Him. And that's that's just a blessing. I don't know how else to say it.
When we talk about giving, what we've tried to reiterate over and over again, and that it's really a heart posture, and that it's trusting God. It's less about the monetary piece of it, though what we read in the Bible is that money really does sometimes take hold of our heart. What it really is just a trust and a faith exercise, that we're going to step out in faith and trust God that He's going to take care of us. You read that scripture from 1 Chronicles. And I think the interesting piece of that was, David, like, everything that we have has come from you anyway. And so are we really even giving anything? Because it was all yours in the first place.
Right.
And that's the mindset that Pastor Rob's been helping us kind of shift our mindset and kind of change the paradigm and realize that everything that we have comes from God. All we are stewards, right? We're simply managing God's resources for him, and he entrusts us with it. And so that's where the faith and the trust to give back and to say, I'm gonna put you first. That's good.
Absolutely. It's how we live our life as Christians, is when we put God first, those first fruits that we realize belong to him. And when we allow those first fruits to be even more of our life, our time, our talent, our giving, then we're blessed.
Yeah, that's good. Have you, as you have kind of walked this journey of generosity, have you had moments that have been tougher than others?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's been times when, my wife and I have talked about, well, this is the tithe amount. And Lord, how's this going to work? And he's been faithful.
Yeah.
He's, I tell my family that God has never failed me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't understand, maybe, but he's never failed me. I can trust him. I can be sure of that. And it's nothing about me at all. It's not me. I'm nothing special. It's God that's working in me, and I'm thankful for that.
We had, when I was a youth pastor in the Jacksonville, Florida area, Bethany and I lived pretty close to paycheck. We had some school debt, and we were just trying to make ends meet because we lived in a pretty affluent area on not a very affluent salary. And the church itself was just struggling to get by. But we were trying to be faithful, and we gave, and we were being good stewards of God's resources, and yet it just didn't feel like anything was going the right way. And then our pastor came to us and asked us to take a 5% pay cut because the church, we just didn't have the money. And I thought, I'm sitting here thinking, we've done everything. So we prayed about it, and Pastor Ray, if you're listening, just so everybody else knows, is when we did that, he said we're gonna take the lead and we're gonna take a 20%. So they took a substantial, but asked us and didn't require us to, just asked if we could, and so we did. And so we came to the congregation and said, here's what we're willing to do to make things better here. And we stood up there with the rest of the leadership team who had committed to give over and above. And I walked off the stage, and somebody walked up to me and said, hey, I've got something for you. And it wasn't a free handout. He didn't just hand me a sack full of money. So I would have gladly accepted, but he didn't. What he did was he's my friend Steve. He owned a photo booth rental company in Jacksonville. And what he did was he said, hey, if you're not busy like on Fridays and Saturdays, I've got events all over the place and this thing's just blowing up and I could use somebody to help. And what he did for me was he more than replaced that 5% pay cut in my life. And, some people say things are coincidences. And one of my mentors always said that coincidences happen more often when you pray. And really those are the sorts of things that I think some people find an envelope of money in their mailbox. And I didn't find that, but God has always been faithful.
Absolutely.
As we have tried to do whatever we could. And like you said, I'm nothing special. I've never had a huge bank account, but we've just tried really hard to live the way that God's called us to live.
Absolutely. One of my favorite stories from here at Shepherd about generosity and giving was we had a senior adult pastor who's passed away now, named Pastor Bob Stewart. And he was pastoring a church in a rural area of Ohio, and a pretty significant sized family. And they were not, as you mentioned, not overflowing with money.
Yeah.
And the leadership of the church told the attendees, the congregation, that there was a family in the church that needed some help. So they were going to have a food drive. That's not so much anymore, but back in the day, it was pretty common to have sacks of groceries. And so he talked to his wife, Dorothy, and they did their best to come up with a sack of groceries for this family. They took it to the church, and I remember Pastor Bob telling the story of how shocked he and Dorothy were when the elders of the church came to their door, knocked, and opened the door, and here they came with all these groceries, and that gift was for them, and they had participated in giving. That God is never taken aback by people's generosity. He wants us to be generous, and I'm thankful for that opportunity.
Well, Steve, I want to thank you for coming out and joining us today on the podcast. Thankful for your story and for your guys' faithfulness for being here for 19 years, you said. And we're glad to have your family a part of things. Thanks for serving in all the places you serve.
Okay, thank you.
But that's going to take care of today's podcast episode. Be sure to subscribe wherever you find our audio. Please leave us a nice 5-star review. And don't forget that we've got an email that you could send your thoughts, your questions, or just about anything you'd like us to see. It's podcast@shepnaz.org. You can learn more about what God is doing at Shepherd through our app, various social media pages, and of course online at shepnaz.org. For Steve, I'm Joey. Have a great day.
This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.